Isaiah 58 is where we're going to be. Isaiah 58. Let's just see how this goes. I have two sets of notes up here. I have my voice is working, and my voice is not set here. So we'll see which one we stick with. So Isaiah 58. One of the strange things about getting older, and especially as your kids get older and you start kind of watching them age and go through life and their personalities change a little bit, you start looking back on your own life and thinking about your own personality and kind of how you have changed and what parts of you have changed and what parts of you that maybe as you've gotten older, it's not so much that they've changed, you've just gotten better manners and you've figured out how to hide some of those things a little bit. If you knew me as a kid, you would know me as someone who was painfully shy around strangers, who did not know how to talk to someone who was not someone that I already knew, very much a natural introvert, but like far on that scale, natural introvert. As a pastor, I've kind of had to work through that a little bit. Talk about God having a sense of humor and working in your weakness. Making me a pastor was one of those things where I've just had to learn to be around people and kind of develop that a little bit more. And so I had to work hard against those tendencies. But another thing you would have picked up on me as a kid, if you were around me for more than about 3 seconds, you would have figured out that I was fiercely competitive about anything. Like, it didn't matter what it was, I was fiercely competitive. Board games, card games, basketball in the driveway, Little League baseball, backyard wiffle ball, jumping off the diving board, whatever it was that I was doing, I would turn it into a game in which there was a competition, and there was not just a, how did I do? There was a clear winner, and there was a clear loser. That's how my life was organized, was around winners and losers. That's how we do it, how I did everything. Who could finish first? Who got more? Who did it faster? Who did it better? Everything became a game. And the phrase, and honestly, this phrase still doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. It's just a game. I don't understand that phrase whatsoever. It's just a game means we're keeping score. And if we're keeping score, that means someone wins and someone loses. And if someone wins and someone loses, I want to win, or there's no point in playing the game. Like, that's the whole principle of what we're trying to do here, right? I did not understand this phrase. It's just a game. Why else keep score if you're not trying to win? Now, as I've gotten older, that has softened a little bit, at least outwardly. Like, you don't turn every family game of basketball in the driveway to the NBA Finals. At least you just don't tell people. Like, you still dominate your kids. You just don't tell them that that's why you're doing it, right? But I've kind of backed off a little bit, not trying to turn everything into a fight or to a win or a loss, primarily just because I'm pretty sure that if I did that, at least at the level that I did when I was a kid, and honestly probably much later in life than I should have, I realized I would be a lonely person for most of my life because nobody would like me. You would not like me if I still acted the way that I did whenever I was like 11, 12 years old and trying to make everything a game. And so, but the reality is that instinct never really disappeared for me. I mean, it may have softened, or maybe I just got soft. I don't know, but I think I probably just got a little more sophisticated. Because I don't necessarily walk around trying to find a competition with everybody around me. But one of the things that I have found is that I have one of these things on my arm. I don't know how many of you guys have an Apple Watch or a Garmin or a step counter or any of that kind of stuff. You have any of that kind of stuff on there? Like right now, that was right on cue. It just told me to check my rings. That's pretty wild. It just told me to check my rings. And so what this little thing does on my arm is it tells me how good I'm doing at this thing that I'm trying to do of life. And so it measures me on whether I stand up, like how many hours a day I actually stand up. It measures my how many minutes a day I exercise. It measures how much movement, how many steps that I have. Like it's it's like a running competition with myself that no one else around me is actually a part of. Like I just am a part of this. And it keeps score for me every day. Like I used to be a legit athlete whenever I was in high school. And now whenever I stand up, my watch gives me a high five. And it's like, hey, you did it. Good job, buddy. Like, we're so proud of you. You stood up today. And so that's what this thing does. And it's amazing how quickly a little scoreboard on your watch can get in your head. These tiny little circles that exist that aren't even real. Like they just exist in some digital world out there. Somehow has the power to make me feel like I'm falling behind, or the power to make me feel like, hey, I'm doing really, really well. I'm doing good today. It's just data. It's not a verdict on my life. And yet, here this thing is on my arm, like quietly scoring my life for me. I didn't ask it to, other than the fact that I gave Apple like money and they said, all right, we're going to collect all this data on you. And we're going to find out whether or not you're a human worthy of us following or not. And so that's what happens. It's quietly scoring everything. And I think this idea of keeping score, the reason that this is such a popular feature and the reason so many of you have your step counters and your Apple Watches and your Garmins and all that kind of stuff is because it taps into something in our psyche that we like to have data and we like to stack that data up against something else. We like to keep score. And that stuff stays with us. We like to keep score in all kinds of ways. Sometimes it's with whatever's on our watch, but sometimes it's with money. Sometimes it's in relationships. Sometimes it's in our marriages, in our friendships. We like to keep score versus our peers. We like to keep score at our jobs versus our coworkers. We like to keep score in a conflict and find out, how right are we and how wrong are they? And that also bleeds all the way into our spiritual walk as well. And the danger is that not just that we keep score in our lives, the danger is that we start to live as though that scorekeeping and that scoreboard that we have is the whole point. And when that happens, there's something inside of us that kind of begins to short circuit a little bit. It produces this inward curvature where everything you do is kind of about how it impacts you and how it affects you. Everything becomes about me. It becomes about what I want, what I need, what I've done, what I've earned, what I'm owed. As long as I'm keeping score, then that becomes the filter that I see my whole life through. You want to see a marriage that's in trouble? Find a husband and a wife that are keeping score with one another. If you can find that, then you will see a marriage that is not working and is on its way to a very dangerous place. You see, when we keep score in life, that's when life gets small. That's when relationships get tight. I would have probably ran off half of my family whenever I was a kid if they weren't my family and stuck with me because I was always keeping score against them and how I did versus them. And here's the biggest thing that you'll start to see if you are always keeping score is that when you keep score, this is when generosity starts to disappear. Because now when you keep score, everything is measured, everything is calculated, everything is tallied, everything is tracked. And when everything goes into a spreadsheet, then everything has to even out. When you take an accounting class, what you find out is that there's all kinds of numbers everywhere, but somehow all of those numbers have to balance out. And if they don't balance out, then you have a big problem. And so what we do is if we put everything into a balance sheet and then we decide,
Does this even out? Or if it doesn't, do we at least make sure that we're in the good? And when you live like that, it turns your whole focus on yourself and on that spreadsheet. In Isaiah 58, God is speaking to a people who have turned spiritual practice into a scoreboard. They have turned following God into this kind of like running tally of who's ahead. And they're completely confused. Because when they look at their spreadsheet, when they look up on the scoreboard, when they check their watch, it says, you guys are winning. But in Isaiah 58, God is going to say, you guys are not only not winning, you're not even playing the right game. So at Isaiah 58, Isaiah is tasked with relaying a message in this chapter that's full of all kinds of like inside jabs. It's full of these little like hidden barbs. And it seeks and it opens up with God saying that, saying to Israel that he wants them to seek him, but to do it in the right way. And Israel is saying, we do seek you daily. So look in Isaiah 58, verse 2. It says, yet they seek me daily and delight to know my ways, as if they were a nation that did righteousness and did not forsake the judgments of their God. They ask of me righteous judgments, and they delight to draw near to God. Now, if you pick up on it, it's kind of a sarcasm sandwich here, right? In this verse, in what you have here. It says that they do these good things. They seek me daily, delight to know my ways. At the bottom, they ask of me righteous judgments. They delight to draw near to God. But in the middle, it's got this one little thing that turns this whole verse into not actually what it sounds like, which is a compliment. It turns it into sarcasm. And it says, Israel says they want to know me. It says they want to know my ways. They say they want to do these things as if they were a righteous bunch of people that haven't turned their back on me over and over and over. And so the picture here is that Israel is this group of people that say the right thing, that ritualistically do the right and the prescribed thing, but they aren't really who they want to pretend or portray that they are. Instead, God says, I know who you really are because I've seen the way that you live day in and day out, day in and day out. You say these things and you do certain things, but the things that matter, you don't do. And they're super confused because they think that they're doing what they've been told. They're scoring spiritual points. They're winning the game of spiritual blessing. They're adding up things on their spreadsheet. They're watching the score run up on the home scoreboard. But the problem is it doesn't seem to be producing the results that they had hoped for. Look in verse 3. They say, why have we fasted? And you see it not. Why have we humbled ourselves? And you take no knowledge of it. That question tells you a lot before we even really get into it and hear what God has to say in response to it. They're not asking the question about whether fasting matters. They're not asking the question about whether fasting is good. They are asking, why isn't it working? Why are they not scoring points the way they think they should be? Why is it not producing the results that they expected? Why doesn't God seem to be responding in the way that they thought he should? Their fasting has become transactional. They have done the thing, and now they're waiting on God to do his thing. They've done their part. Now God needs to do his. They've turned this spiritual practice of fasting into an exchange, into a barter system, into a, if you do this for me, or if I do this for you, God, I expect you to do this for me. We denied ourselves. Why has that not gotten your attention, God? Got everybody else's attention around us. They think we're great. Why has it not gotten your attention? We did the hard thing. Why aren't you paying out in return? That's how this should work. Why are you not doing that? And I think most of us know this feeling well, whether we want to admit it or not. This kind of thinking is baked into most of our worldviews, either our good Western Christians learn this pattern, or even just as good Americans who were taught if you work hard, you do the right thing, everything's just going to kind of work out for you. And it's very easy to turn spiritual practices into these type of scoreboards. It's very easy to bring the Apple Watch instinct into our discipleship. I prayed, I fasted, I showed up, I did the right thing, and then very quickly, we're not worshiping anymore at that point. We're not doing what God has actually called us to do at that point. We're simply keeping score. We're telling the scorekeeper, hey, you missed that one. That was a 3, not a 2. Make sure you give me full credit for that one, right? And you know what? I got an and 1 on this one because I got fouled and it was super hard. I need extra credit for this one. God, you need to give me full credit for all of this. God sees them and he answers them. And he doesn't say, oh, you're not fasting hard enough. He doesn't say you need to be more disciplined. I think this is the response most of us feel whenever we feel like maybe we're kind of like missing it with God and a relationship with God isn't great. Well, I just need to try harder. I just need to be more disciplined. He doesn't say that. He says, in effect, you don't understand the fast that I choose. Essentially, you're playing a game that I. Look with me in verse 4 here. He says, behold, you fast only to quarrel and to fight and to hit with a wicked fist. Fasting like yours this day will not make your voice to be heard on high. Is such the fast that I choose, a day for a person to humble himself? Is it to bow down his head like a reed and to spread sackcloth and ashes under him? Will you call this a fast and a day acceptable to the Lord? I think Israel reading this probably is like, well, yeah. Isn't that what you asked me to do? Isn't that what I'm supposed to do? Yeah, that's exactly what I'm doing, God. And then this is what God says in verse 6. Is not this the fast that I chose, or that I choose? To loose the bonds of wickedness, to undo the straps of the yoke, to let the oppressed go free, and to break every yoke? Is it not to share your bread with the hungry and bring the homeless poor into your house? When you see the naked, to cover him and not hide yourself from your own flesh? So God comes back and he's like, no. You got this idea of fasting all wrong. You're doing it for all the wrong reasons. I remember as a kid, I would get so frustrated with my family, especially like my mom and dad, whenever I had created this game that didn't exist 5 minutes before that. I had created this game with this intricate set of rules that were carefully crafted so that I could win. And I would come up with all these rules, and then I would take it very seriously. They would not. It would bother me so much that they did not care about the score of this amazing game that I had created. It just would get me so angry, like they were wasting my time and they were rude. I was like, why don't you try as hard as I'm trying at this? Make it at least a little bit competitive. Can you guys not do that for me? What's the deal? And I imagine this is how Israel must have felt in that moment. Like, how dare God accuse me of being unspiritual? I'm the most spiritual person that I know. I'm doing everything right. How dare God do something like that? Then look in verse 6. God says, you're playing this game, but I never gave it to you to play. Is not this the fast that I choose? And that line is so confrontational. That is so much God saying, this is not what we're doing. God is saying, you have your version of fasting and I have mine. You have a version that's measurable, visible, manageable, limited, contained, simple. You can put it on a ledger, you can put it on a spreadsheet, and you can decide whether it balances at the end of the day. I have a version that goes much deeper than that, and it does not fit on a spreadsheet. And then notice the verbs that he uses there: to loose, to undo, to let go free, to break. It is this striking language. It's not private. It's not inward. It's not self-focused. It is liberation language. It is the language of burdens being lifted, of people being set free, of something that was tight being loosened, of something being set right that was wrong. Which means the fast God chooses does not terminate on the person practicing it. That's the first thing that we have to kind of let sink in our lives here. As we go through Lent right now, and we're talking about different practices in Lent, God addresses some of this, and he says, look, the fast that I choose isn't about you, the one fasting, at all. The people are thinking that fasting as something that they are doing, but God starts describing fasting in terms of what kind of world is being created around them by the fasting that they are doing. And so the question is, does your worship of God, does your following God, does it loosen what is bound? Does it lighten what is heavy? Does it free anyone? Or does it just make you more conscious of your own religious seriousness? Because if that's the end of your religion, if that's the end of your worship, is this proof to yourself and your proof to God that you're serious about him, then it is not the kind of fast God chooses. That is not an easy question to answer. The reality is you can fast and you can still be spiritually kind of curled in on yourself. You can deny yourself food. You can live in a way that you can deny yourself food, and you can still live in a way that makes your life smaller, that makes your God smaller. You can be highly disciplined and still be closed-hearted. You can do the religious thing, and you can still be operating from a scoreboard that God never gave you. And then in verse 7, it makes it even more concrete. It says, is it not for you to share your bread with the hungry and bring the homeless poor into your house when you see the naked to cover him? And so this text gets very ordinary, but it also gets very practical. Share your bread. Not bread in theory, but share your bread. Not generic compassion, but actually help others. Care about others. You don't get to define your religion by what you do for yourself. It is where it looks outwardly towards others. What you have to be able to do is you have to be able to look and say, this is what was naturally mine, now becomes directed towards others, and that happens through grace. You keep on going. It's just one after another that are all tangible ways of showing God's grace to others. The movement of the text is unmistakable. The idea here is that grace changes that inward curvature to make you now look outward toward others. And then at the very end, what comes is what might be kind of the sharpest moment of the whole indictment from God here. And he says that ultimately this is, and not to hide yourself from your own flesh. That line gets right at us. That gets right at our heart. Because now we are not only talking about bread or shelter or clothing or doing things. We're talking about the instinct that drives so much of our sin, or at least sits over top of so much of our sin, and that is the instinct to hide. To hide from need, to hide from inconvenience, to hide from God and his holiness, to hide from claims that other people would make on us. We hide behind busyness. We hide behind our church things that we do, this appearance of holiness. We hide behind caution and being risk averse. We hide behind this idea of, you know what, I got my own stuff going on. I just got to deal with my own stuff right now. We hide behind these spiritual practices that make us feel like we're engaged while our hearts remain closed. And all of that instinct is deeply tied to this instinct to keep score. Because keeping score is probably the best way to protect yourself, especially when you're the scorekeeper. You know, one of the funny things about this Apple Watch is I can open up my phone, and right now I've got it set on certain levels where it says that congratulations, you completed it for the day. I can go and change all of those. I can go and set it up to where if I do 1 minute of exercise today, it will high five me like I just ran a marathon. Because I set it up to say, all I need in order to succeed is to have 1 minute of exercise today. I can set it up to where if I just get out of bed, it high fives me and says, great, you accomplished your goal. It was a perfect day for you today. I can set it up to where my step goal is 20 steps. And all I got to do is like get up and make it to the bathroom and make it to the kitchen, and it will high five me and be like, you are awesome today. You did amazing today. And this is how most of us set up our spiritual scorecard. We put it just high enough to make ourselves feel like we've done something, but not so high that we can't actually achieve it. And so we set up this spiritual scorecard that makes us look like we've done something really great. And that's such an easy way for us to hide. Such an easy way for us to protect ourselves. Such an easy way for us to give us distance from this command that God gives us. Because it lets us stay measured and guarded and calculated. It lets us determine what is owed before we decide what love actually requires. It lets us say, I've done enough, I've carried enough, I've given enough. I'll give more eventually, but not until somebody else gives something else. I'll eventually get there, but I don't have to get there now until somebody else rises up to the spreadsheet that I've built. And this is what becomes a transactional life. And Isaiah 58 is exposing just how small that life is. And you can start to see the contrast in this passage as you put it all together. There really are two different ways to live that are in view here. There's the life that is always measuring, always calculating, always holding back, always taking, always protecting, always keeping everything behind you, always like subtly asking this question, what's in it for me? What do I get for this? What's my ROI? What's my return on investment here? That's true all over life, but especially in religion. But then there's the second way to live. The first is the closed life. The second is what I will call the open life. This is the life that shares bread, that makes room, where your eyes look up and no longer are down at the spreadsheet or up on the scoreboard, but they're looking around and at all the people around you, and your eyes become these tools where you notice need and you notice people. And you stop hiding and you stop like reducing every interaction with someone to a transaction. It's where your hands are open and your eyes are searching, looking for someone to bless. And the difference between these two lives is not personality. This is not an extrovert versus an introvert. This is not nice people versus harsh people. Do you know what the difference is in these two lives? It's grace. Because a gospel-centered life has a fullness that makes transactional living incompatible with that life. And that's what's really underneath this whole text in Isaiah 58. A person who is living on a ledger is living out of scarcity. You know, I've heard people talk about whenever they adopt children out of an orphanage, especially in a country where the orphanage didn't have much, that those orphans initially, they learn to live with a scarcity mindset. And so even if they're not hungry, they'll just take stuff. They'll take it and take it and take it, and they'll hide it, and they'll take it and they'll hide it. They'll take it and they'll hide it, and they'll just put it wherever they can, even if they don't need it, just because there might be a day where they're going to need it. And we start to live with that kind of a mindset, and we start to get this idea that it's a zero-sum game, that if you get mercy, then there's not going to be enough mercy left over for me. And there's a scarcity of mercy out there, and there's a scarcity of security, and there's a scarcity of joy. So if you have joy, then that means somebody over here is not getting joy. Or if you have joy, more specifically, that means I must not be having joy. But that's not how the Bible talks about this stuff. It's not a zero-sum game. But if you live with that closed life, everything must be tracked. Everything is fragile. Everything must be repaid. Nothing is free. And if everything is a transaction, then every relationship becomes exhausting. But grace does something else. Grace gives a person this kind of fullness. Not because all the problems disappear, not because the world becomes easy, not because it doesn't cost anything, but because we're no longer trying to build a spreadsheet and base our life on these transactions. When you've experienced grace and you know what it is to be loved without earning, forgiven without repaying, to receive without bargaining. When that grace takes root, when it sinks deeply enough, it starts to loosen your grip on this world that you have held so tightly. It starts making scorekeeping feel thin and tiring and petty. It's like trying to build a whole life around closing rings on a watch that nobody's looking at anyway. And the idea here is that the grace should build within the followers of Jesus this generosity of spirit that is unmatched in the world. One of the clearest places that this idea of like ledger living and keeping score shows up is in forgiveness. Now, this is not primarily a forgiveness sermon, but this is just one of the easiest places to see it. Because forgiveness is about debt. It is about what someone owes you because of what they've done, specifically what they've done to you. I want to be clear and careful here. Forgiveness doesn't mean pretending something doesn't matter. It doesn't mean calling evil good. It doesn't mean immediate reconciliation. It doesn't mean trust without wisdom. It doesn't mean there's no consequences. That's not what I'm talking about. But forgiveness does mean that you begin releasing the debt into God's hands instead of continuing to collect payment for it so that your ledger adds up and balances. And all that matters because transactional life feels so powerful for a while, especially when you've been wronged. Keeping the ledger can feel like strength. Rehearsing the case against someone can feel like control. Holding on to the debt can feel like justice. But eventually that becomes its own prison. Because if you live as a collector, you're still chained to that debt. You are still living by that scoreboard. Grace makes you free enough to start loosening your hold on the ledger. Not because what happened was small, but because you don't want your whole life to be governed by your need to collect payment. That generosity of spirit shows up in other places too. It shows up in your resources, how you share your bread. It shows up in hospitality. Do you make room for others? It shows up in the attention that you give. Do you pour yourself out on behalf of others? It shows up in your speech. Do you stop demanding to be right or to be heard? Do you stop demanding to even be all that important? All of these things are really just expressions of the same freedom God has given us. That grace has made us open. And instead of holding things tight, we live with our arms and our hands open. And this is what verses 8 through 11 are about. Because after God exposes the false fasting, he then redefines the fast that he chooses, and then he gives this promise in verse 8. He says, "Then shall your light break forth like the dawn, and your healing shall spring up speedily. Your righteousness shall go before you. The glory of the Lord shall be your rear guard. And then you shall call, and the Lord will answer. And you shall cry, and he will say, 'Here I am.' And if you take away the yoke from your midst, the pointing of the finger, then speaking wickedness, if you pour yourself out for the hungry and satisfy the desire of the afflicted, then shall your light rise in the darkness, and your gloom be as noonday. And the Lord will guide you continually and satisfy your desire in scorched places and make your bones strong. And then you shall be like a watered garden, like a spring of water whose waters do not fail." That is no small promise that we are given. God is saying, when your life stops being curled in on itself, when grace makes you a generous spirit, something happens. Light rises, healing springs up, darkness begins to break, things begin to grow where nothing was there before. He's not saying generosity earns his love. He's saying generosity reveals the kind of grace that is already that has already taken root. And I think this is where it really lands for us, because transactional living always darkens life and it kills what was there. It makes life tighter and smaller and more suspicious and more exhausting. There's a heaviness of a life that always keeps score. There's no freedom in constantly measuring what is owed to you. But the generous life is different. It's not easier in the sense that it doesn't cost us anything. It does cost. Sharing our bread, sharing our resources costs. Making room for others costs us something. Letting go of the scorecard costs something. Forgiveness costs something. Mercy costs something. But it is still a freer way to live, because you are no longer carrying this exhausting scoreboard on your wrist saying, this is the sum total of your life. You better make sure you finish in the black. The reason that we're looking at this text right now in the middle of this season of Lent is because we're walking through these practices of Lent, and we're saying, all right, how do we apply what the church has traditionally done for years? Lent is not meant to make us more self-absorbed. It's not meant to turn us into spiritual accountants, in which during this season of Lent we're adding into our spiritual bank account so that we can draw throughout the rest of the year. That is not the goal. That's not what we're trying to do. It's not meant to make us obsess over what we give up so that our hearts can remain closed. It's meant to return us to God in a way that opens our hands and opens our lives. Prayer and fasting are the tradition, probably the most well-known traditional parts of the Lent season. We talked about those over the last couple of weeks. But another traditional practice of the Lent season is called almsgiving, or basically just giving giving to others. Giving to charity is a lot of times kind of how that is, charitable giving, how that is talked about. And so the idea here is that in order to practice Lent, what you do is you pray, you fast, and you give money to charitable causes. And that's great. If you have money to give to charity, do it. We're sitting here talking about fundraising for Life Outreach Center. I'm not knocking any of that kind of stuff. But we've talked about prayer, we've talked about fasting, and now what we're talking about on this third one is not so much giving money away, not that ideal of almsgiving. The idea that we're talking about here is a life where the mercy and the grace and the forgiveness that you have experienced and should be experiencing at an even greater level during this season moves from this theoretical thing that makes us worship God to where that worship now drives us to concrete practices for others. So here's the practice that we can put, the thing that we can do, that we can kind of put into practice during the rest of this Lent season. It's just quiet acts of mercy that cost you something real. That's the way I would describe almsgiving in our context here. Quiet acts of mercy that cost you something real. Money, time, attention, convenience, forgiveness, pride, cost you the idea of being right. Think about what that would be. Ask the Spirit to show you what that would look like now. Whenever you feel like God is leading you, do it quietly. Don't announce it. Don't perform it. And as you do it, ask yourself one simple question. Is this grace opening my hands and opening my life where I'm no longer keeping score, or am I doing this to put it down on my spreadsheet so that God will be impressed? Because that's really the question behind Isaiah 58. There's two kinds of lives in this passage. One is closed, guarded, transactional, always measuring, always counting. It looks very serious. It looks like you've been told a good spiritual person looks your whole life. But it is small, and it is a prison, and it has nothing to do with grace. The other is open, merciful, generous, freely giving, not careless, not foolish, but not ruled by a scoreboard. Not keeping a scorebook of a game that God never gave us to play. This is not a life that you achieve by trying harder. It is a life rooted in the work of grace. And if you are a Christian, this is what God is forming in you, not just in the season of Lent, but as a way of living. As Christians, we should be marked by this generosity of spirit. That should be what we are known by, this generosity of spirit. God wants to make you not just a more disciplined person, but a freer person. And a person whose life begins to shine light on all those around you because grace has made you generous in spirit. And if you are not a Christian, the invitation here this morning is not peace, go and give your money away and be nice to somebody. The invitation is to receive the generosity of God through His Son, Jesus Christ. And because until you know what it is to be loved without earning, forgiven without repaying, and welcomed without bargaining, then you will keep trying to live a life rooted in transactions, and you will never know the freedom and the hope that we sang about earlier of the love of Jesus Christ. The gospel offers something fuller than that. And that fullness makes that life of scorekeeping feel so small and so petty. So don't aim for impressive. Aim for open. And trust that as grace opens you and as grace opens your life, then your light really can, the promise we have in verse 8 and 10, that your life can be a life that is the light breaking like the dawn into other people's lives. Think about that for just a second. If you live a life that is open, that doesn't keep score, that isn't always asking the question, do I have enough for me before I give away for everyone else? You simply have a life that says, God, here it is, use it. Let me do something tangible with this grace and this mercy that you've given me. If you live a life like that, you become a conduit to the light of Jesus Christ that shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. You have that in you. Christ in you, the hope of glory. That's how we are designed to work as Christians. The opportunity that we have before us to live a life that is marked by grace is not one that is a more disciplined life. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but it is not necessarily a more impressive life. But it is a more generous life. And it is a life with open hands and open hearts. Let's pray together. Father, your grace and your mercy were on your people, the people of Israel. You called them out and you said, you do all these things as if you actually knew who I was. Father, I pray that you would not say this about us. Father, may we be a people that practice the type of fast, the type of religion, the type of life that live the type of life that reflects not a spiritual practice, but the work of grace in our lives. May we be a people that are known for the generosity of our spirit and the way we love and remain open to others. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Would you all stand and sing?